The transport shuttle's engines hummed their final notes before falling silent. David Reed pressed his palm against the window, watching the green and brown landscape rush up to meet him. Somewhere down there, 30 days of hell waited. At least that was what everyone else seemed to think. The Galactic Council representative, a tall being with too many joints in its arms, had explained the rules 3 times. David wondered if that was normal, or if they thought humans were stupid. Survive 30 standard cycles on Testing Ground 7. Use only the provided equipment, don't die. Simple enough. The human understands the mortality rate for this assessment? The representative's translator made its voice sound like grinding metal. 67% of candidates require medical extraction. 15% do not survive. David nodded. He had grown up in the Rockies, spending summers with his grandfather learning which plants would feed him and which would kill him. He had tracked elk through snowstorms and started fires in rain. Earth was rated a Class 12 Deathworld, whatever that meant. This place was rated Class 8. I understand, David said. The shuttle doors opened. Hot air rushed in, carrying smells of vegetation and something else. Something animal. David's grandfather had taught him to trust his nose. Predators had a scent, subtle but distinct. This planet had them. David stepped onto the landing platform with his pack. Inside were the basics required by council regulations. A scanner that would show topography and water sources. An emergency beacon if things went truly wrong. A water purifier, a knife. That was all. Around him, screens floated in the air. Observer stations, the representative had called them. Beings from across the galaxy would watch his every move, recording data for their scientific studies. David tried not to think about it. Being watched wouldn't change what he needed to do. The shuttle lifted off, leaving him alone. David stood still for 5 full minutes, just listening. Wind through leaves, water running somewhere to his left, bird calls, or whatever this planet had instead of birds, and underneath it all, the quiet sounds of things moving through brush. He checked his scanner. The topography showed a river system cutting through forested hills. Cliffs rose to the north. Caves dotted the scanner's map, marked in yellow. Every instinct told David to avoid them. Caves meant shelter, but they also meant something else had the same idea. David started walking, but not toward any obvious destination. He followed animal trails, noting their width and the marks along them. Large creatures used this path. The bark on the trees showed claw marks at varying heights, some fresh, some old. Multiple species competing for territory. He found scat near a stream crossing. David crouched, examining it without touching. Partially digested bone fragments, fur from something smaller. A carnivore's dropping, still soft enough to be recent. His grandfather's voice echoed in his memory. Know what's hunting before you become what's hunted. The sun moved across the sky while David explored. He rejected 3 possible shelter sites. The first was too close to what looked like a game trail. The second sat in a depression that would flood in rain. The third had bones scattered around it, old kills from something that considered this its dining room. Finally, David found what he needed. A slight rise near the river, elevated enough to avoid flooding but close enough for water access. Trees thick enough to provide materials and cover. Most importantly, clear sight lines in all directions. Nothing could approach without him seeing it first. David set down his pack and got to work. He cut saplings with his knife, testing different types for flexibility and strength. His grandfather had taught him how to weave them together, creating a frame that would hold weight. Other candidates might rush to build something fast. David took his time, doing it right. Hours passed. David stripped bark and gathered mud from the riverbank. He wove the saplings into a raised platform, lifting his sleeping area off the ground. Insects and small predators hunted at ground level. Better to be higher. The mud and bark became walls, packed tight to keep out wind and rain. David left the entrance small and positioned it away from prevailing winds. He scattered leaves and branches around the shelter's exterior, making it blend with the surroundings. Inside the observation stations, beings David would never meet watched and commented. Some praised his methodical approach. Others called it a waste of time. One representative from a species that lived in crystal hives insisted the human would be dead within 3 cycles. David didn't hear any of it. He was building a separate food cache now, elevated on poles he had cut and sharpened. Food on the ground meant scent trails. Scent trails meant visitors. He wanted control over what came near his shelter. As the sun began setting, David allowed himself a moment to rest. His hands hurt. His back ached. But he had shelter, positioned well with good sight lines. Tomorrow he would focus on food and water, then security, then comfort if time allowed. Something howled in the distance. The sound echoed across the valley, predatory and hungry. David listened carefully, judging the direction and distance. Far enough for now, but it meant the hunters were waking up. He climbed into his shelter and sealed the entrance with a woven panel he had made. Not enough to stop a determined predator, but enough to slow one down and give him warning. David lay in the darkness listening to the night sounds of an alien world. His scanner showed his biosigns were stable. Somewhere far above, the observers noted that the human's heart rate was slower than expected. They had anticipated fear. Instead, they saw calm. David closed his eyes. 30 days. He had done harder things. Maybe not on an alien planet, but the principles remained the same. Shelter first, food second. Stay alert. Stay alive. Outside, something screamed. Something else answered. The night belonged to them. David slept anyway. Water tasted different on every world. David learned that his first morning on Testing Ground 7, cupping his hands in the river and drinking deep. Minerals he couldn't name left a metallic tang on his tongue. The purifier made it safe, but it couldn't make it taste like home. He had woken before dawn listening to the shift between night hunters and day creatures. That transition time was safest for humans. The nocturnal predators were heading to sleep. The diurnal ones were just waking. David used that window to move. His first task was food. The protein bars in his pack would last a week if he rationed carefully. But David had learned long ago that relying on limited supplies was a good way to starve. He needed to find food, not just consume what he had brought. The river offered options. David waded into the shallows, watching how the water moved around rocks. Fish, or something like fish, created ripples as they swam. He had seen them the day before, silver bodies darting through the current. David cut a straight branch and spent an hour sharpening it into a spear. His grandfather had taught him this too. Patience beat speed when it came to tools. A dull spear missed. A sharp one fed you. He stood motionless in the water, spear raised. The key was not to hunt the fish, but to understand them. They followed patterns, swimming in predictable routes between rocks. David waited until one passed close, then struck. The first attempt missed. So did the second and third. On the fourth try, the spear pierced scales and pinned a thrashing body against the riverbed. David pulled it up, examining his catch. Longer than his forearm, with fins that looked almost like wings. Good meat. By midday, David had caught 3 more. He built a small fire using a bow drill, friction creating the spark his lighter couldn't waste fuel on. The fish cooked slowly over the flames, their smell making his stomach growl. David ate one fish completely, bones and all. Calcium was important. He wrapped the other 3 in large leaves and placed them in his elevated cache. Tonight he would build a smoking rack. Preserved meat meant freedom to focus on other tasks. That afternoon, David set traps. He carved snares from thin vines, positioning them along the animal trails he had identified. A deadfall trap went near what looked like a burrow entrance. He used his observations from the previous day, placing each trap where signs showed regular traffic. The work took hours. Good traps required understanding animal behavior. David had to think like the creatures he wanted to catch. What paths did they prefer? What heights did they travel at? What would attract them? He was checking his third snare when he heard it. A sound somewhere between a cough and a growl, wet and painful. David froze, his hand moving slowly to his knife. The sound came again, closer now. David turned carefully. 30 meters away, something massive moved through the trees. It stood on 6 legs, each ending in claws that tore furrows in the dirt. Armor plating covered its back, overlapping scales that caught the light. Spines ran along its ridge, some broken, others intact. The creature stopped. Its head swung toward David, nostrils flaring. Up close, David could see the problem. A wound festered along its left flank, green and swollen. Infection. The smell of it carried on the wind, sour and wrong. David had seen this kind of injury before. Elk sometimes got them after fights during mating season. Without treatment, infection led to fever. Fever led to aggression. Aggression led to attacks on anything nearby, including humans. The creature took a step forward. David stayed perfectly still, controlling his breathing. Running triggered chase instincts. Fighting was suicide. That left one option. Easy, David said softly. His voice was calm, almost conversational. I know it hurts. Believe me, I know. The creature's ears, or what passed for ears, swiveled toward him. Its eyes were yellow, pupils contracted with pain and fever. David took one slow step backward, then another. His hand stayed visible, palm out, empty of weapons. I'm not a threat. You're not food to me. We don't need to do this. Another step back. The creature watched but didn't advance. David kept talking, his voice steady and low. Words didn't matter, tone did. Every animal understood tone. You're sick. That wound needs cleaning. But I can't help you if you eat me first. David reached his pack slowly. He pulled out one of his wrapped fish, unwrapping it with deliberate movements. The creature's nostrils flared again, catching the scent. David tossed the fish halfway between them and backed away further. Peace offering, take it. I've got more. The creature limped forward. It sniffed the fish, then consumed it in 2 bites. Those jaws could have taken David's arm off without effort. Good, David said. See? I'm not your enemy. He backed away until trees separated them, then turned and walked steadily toward his shelter. Not running. Never run. Behind him, the creature made that wet coughing sound again, but it didn't follow. Back at camp, David's hands shook slightly. Adrenaline did that. He had just stood face to face with something that could kill him in seconds. But he hadn't died. More importantly, neither had the creature. David built his smoking rack, hanging the remaining fish over a low fire. While they cooked, he thought about the wounded predator. Infection would kill it eventually. Fever would make it dangerous to everything in the area, including him. His grandfather's voice spoke in his memory again. Animals aren't evil. They're just trying to survive, same as us. David looked at his medical supplies. The basic first aid kit included antiseptic and antibiotics, meant for his own injuries. He had plants, too, gathered during his exploration. Some had properties similar to earth medicines. He had tested small amounts on his own skin, watching for reactions. It was a crazy idea. Insane, even. But David had never been entirely sane, according to most people. The next morning, David placed another fish near where he had encountered the creature. This time he added something else. A paste made from crushed medicinal plants smeared on the fish's flesh. If the creature ate it, the medicine would enter its system. Not enough to cure the infection, but enough to start fighting it. David left before the creature appeared. But from his shelter he watched through gaps in the walls. The predator came, limping and slow. It ate the fish, medicine and all. Above the planet, in observation stations David couldn't see, beings argued about what they were witnessing. Some called it brilliant. Others called it suicidal. One observer started a betting pool on how long the human would last. David didn't know about any of that. He just knew that sometimes the best way to survive wasn't to fight everything. Sometimes it was to make an ally instead. 5 days into the test, David's traps had caught 4 small creatures that looked like rabbits with too many legs. He had named the big predator Crest after the ridge of spines along its back. Names made things easier. His grandfather had named trees, rocks, even the wind. Everything deserves recognition, the old man had said. Crest appeared every morning now. David left fish at increasing distances from the den he had located. Each offering included the medicinal paste. The infection was improving. The swelling had gone down and the creature moved with less pain. David talked to Crest constantly, narrating his activities. Building a better fish trap today. The current's strong near those rocks, so I'll position it there. Fish are creatures of habit, you know? They take the same routes. Crest watched from the shadows. Those yellow eyes tracked every movement. David pretended not to notice, giving the animal space while establishing routine. Routine built trust. Trust built safety. On the 6th day, something changed. David was checking his snares when he felt it. A presence behind him, close enough that he heard breathing. David's heart rate jumped, but he forced himself to move slowly, turning his head. Crest stood 3 meters away. This close, the creature was massive. Its shoulder reached David's chest. Those claws could disembowel him with a casual swipe. "Morning," David said quietly. "You're looking better. That wound's healing nicely." Crest made a sound, low and rumbling, not aggressive, almost curious. David went back to checking his snare, moving naturally. "Caught something here yesterday. Should check if anything's here now." The snare was empty. David reset it, aware of Crest watching every action. When he finished, he stood and looked directly at the creature. "I'm heading to the river. You're welcome to come. Or not. Your choice." David walked away. Behind him, he heard the soft pad of 6 feet following. He smiled but didn't look back. Looking back might seem like a challenge. Forward was better. At the river, David waded into his fishing spot. Crest settled on the bank, watching. David caught 2 fish, keeping up his constant narration. "The key is patience. Wait for them to forget you're there. Then strike fast." He tossed 1 fish to the bank near Crest. The creature caught it in those massive jaws and swallowed. David kept the second for himself, eating it raw. Cooking could wait. This was a moment of sharing, and that mattered more. Days became a routine. David worked on improving his camp while Crest followed at varying distances. Sometimes close, sometimes far, but always present. The creature learned David's patterns. David learned Crest's warnings, different sounds that meant different things. One evening, Crest made a sharp hissing sound. David looked up from his fire to see the creature's spines raised, body tense. Warning. David grabbed his spear and scanned the tree line. Movement flickered between shadows. Not one creature, several. Smaller than Crest but moving with pack coordination, they emerged into the clearing. 4-legged predators, each the size of a large dog. Scales covered their bodies and their mouths showed too many teeth. They spread out, flanking positions that spoke of intelligence and practice. David backed toward his shelter, spear ready. He had his knife as backup, but against 4 hunters. Poor odds. Crest moved between David and the pack. The big predator's growl was deeper now, territorial. The pack hesitated. They had expected easy prey, not defended prey. The pack leader feinted left. One of its companions darted right. Classic distraction tactics, but Crest didn't fall for it. The creature spun with surprising speed, catching the flanking attacker with a swing of its armored head. The impact sent the smaller predator tumbling. The others retreated slightly, reassessing. David used the moment to climb onto his elevated shelter platform. Height advantage, better position. The pack tried twice more. Each time, Crest blocked them, using size and armor to dominate the space. Those venomous spines made close attacks dangerous. The pack hunters were smart enough to recognize a losing fight. They withdrew into the forest, leaving David and Crest alone in the clearing. David's hands were shaking again. He climbed down slowly, approaching Crest with careful steps. The creature had reopened its wound slightly during the fight. Blood seeped through the healing skin. "Come here," David said softly. "Let me look at that." Crest sat, a position that looked almost like a dog waiting. David cleaned the wound with his remaining antiseptic, talking the whole time. "You saved my life. You know that? They would have gotten me eventually. Pack hunters always do." He applied fresh medicinal paste and wrapped it with cloth from his spare shirt. Crest tolerated the treatment, occasionally making low sounds that David chose to interpret as appreciation. That night, Crest slept near David's shelter. Not inside, but close. Protective. David lay awake for a long time thinking about what had happened. He had made an ally. No, more than that. A friend. The next morning brought a new sound. High-pitched chirping mixed with distressed screeches. David followed the noise to a ravine. At the bottom, something thrashed against rocks. David carefully descended. The creature was like nothing he had seen before. Membranous wings stretched between elongated limbs. A flying predator, grounded by injury. One wing bent at an unnatural angle, clearly broken. The creature hissed at David's approach, terrified and defensive. Behind David, Crest appeared at the ravine's edge, making aggressive sounds toward the flying predator. "No," David said firmly to Crest. "Look at it. It's hurt, not a threat." David approached the flying creature slowly, hands extended. "I know everything hurts and you're scared. I get it, but I can help." The creature snapped at him, but weakly. David dodged easily. He spent an hour just sitting nearby, talking in that same calm tone. Eventually, exhaustion won over fear. The creature stopped thrashing. David splinted the wing using straight sticks and strips from his remaining spare clothes. The creature, which he named Glide, accepted food hesitantly. Small pieces of fish offered from a distance. By evening, David had 3 mouths to feed. Glide couldn't fly, so it remained grounded near the camp. Crest circled the flying predator suspiciously at first, but David intervened constantly, forcing proximity while maintaining peace. "You're both stuck with me now," David explained to them, "and stuck with each other. So we might as well get along." He fed them separately at first, keeping distance between them, but gradually David brought the feeding spots closer, forced cooperation through shared resources. Above the planet, the observers had stopped betting on David's death. They were now betting on something else entirely. How many creatures would the human adopt? The xenopsychology department worked overtime, documenting every interaction. This wasn't standard survival behavior. This was something they had no framework to understand. David didn't care about frameworks. He cared about staying alive. And if that meant building a family from predators, well, his grandfather had always said humans were good at making friends in strange places. Crest and Glide slept on opposite sides of the shelter that night. David slept in the middle, safer that way for everyone. The clay near the river bend held its shape when David squeezed it. He had been looking for good clay for 3 days. Pottery meant water storage. Water storage meant fewer trips to the river. Fewer trips meant more time for other tasks. David shaped the clay into rough bowls, using techniques his grandfather had shown him decades ago. The old man had learned it from a Pueblo friend. Knowledge traveled through people, connecting them across time and distance. Crest watched from the shade, wound fully healed now. The big predator had become David's shadow, following everywhere except when hunting alone. Glide perched on a low branch nearby, wing still splinted but healing well. The flying predator made soft chirping sounds, almost conversational. "You two are probably wondering why I'm playing in the mud," David said, working the clay. "This'll be useful. Trust me." He built a primitive kiln using river stones and fired the bowls slowly. Most cracked. 2 survived. Those 2 meant more water storage than his single canteen provided. David's camp had evolved. The original shelter now had 2 additions, one for food storage, elevated and covered, another for tool making, where David shaped wood and stone into increasingly sophisticated implements. He had started a garden too, transplanting edible plants he had identified near the river. They grew in neat rows, watered daily. The plants probably wouldn't produce much in 30 days, but maintaining them gave David purpose beyond mere survival. On day 14, David met the 4th member of his unlikely family. The creature came to the river to drink at dawn. David was checking his fish traps when he noticed the water's surface rippling from something massive. He looked up and froze. The herbivore stood 4 meters tall at the shoulder. Its body was thick with muscle covered in gray-green hide. A head like a hammer sat atop a neck wider than David's entire body. When it walked, the ground trembled. David had seen its tracks before, but never the animal itself. The scanner called this species river titans, gentle and less threatened, but capable of killing with casual ease. One step could crush a human. One swing of that head could pulverize bones. This titan had deep gashes along its flank, 4 parallel cuts that wept blood into the river water. Something had attacked it, something with large claws. The wounds needed treatment before infection set in. David knew he should walk away. This was beyond his ability to help. But the titan's eyes met his across the water, and David saw pain there, recognition of a shared problem, injury in a dangerous world. "Stupid," David muttered to himself. Then louder to the titan, "Stay there, don't move." The creature probably didn't understand words, but tone carried meaning. David waded across the river, arms spread wide to appear non-threatening. The titan watched him approach, muscles tensing. "Easy. I'm just going to look at those cuts. They'll get infected if we don't clean them." Up close, the titan was even more massive. David felt like an insect standing beside it. Those wounds were deeper than they had appeared from across the river. Claw marks from something huge. David climbed onto a rock to reach the injuries. The titan shifted but didn't flee. He cleaned the wounds with river water first, then applied every remaining bit of antiseptic he had. His entire medical supply gone in minutes. "This is all I have." David explained, working the medicine into the cuts. It'll have to be enough. He created poultices from his medicinal plants using leaves to hold them in place. The Titan tolerated everything, occasionally making low rumbling sounds. David chose to believe they were grateful rather than annoyed. The treatment took hours. When David finally finished, his arms ached from reaching upward. The Titan lowered its massive head, bringing its face level with David's. They stayed like that for a moment, human and giant regarding each other. Then the Titan turned and walked into the forest, each step shaking the earth. David returned to camp exhausted. Crest greeted him with concerned sounds, sniffing at David's clothes, which now carried the Titan's scent. Glide chirped from its perch. Made a new friend, David told them. A really big one. 2 days later, the Titan returned. David heard it before he saw it, the ground announcing its approach. The creature emerged from the trees and simply stood near the camp, watching. David named it Boulder. The Titan stayed close for 3 days, then disappeared again. But it came back. Always came back. On day 17, council inspectors arrived unannounced. David was working on expanding his garden when the shuttle descended. He stood slowly, recognizing official markings. Beside him, Crest rose as well, spines raising slightly. Glide took flight, circling overhead despite the still healing wing. 3 council representatives emerged from the shuttle. They looked around the camp with multiple eyes, appendages, and sensors. David couldn't read their expressions, but their body language screamed surprise. David Reed, human candidate, the lead inspector said through a translator. We are here for mid-assessment inspection. Understood, David replied. Would you like to see the camp? He started to gesture toward his shelters when Boulder emerged from the forest. The Titan's arrival made the ground shake. All 3 inspectors stumbled backward. It's okay, David said quickly. Boulder's friendly. Well, mostly. Just don't make sudden movements. Crest moved to David's side, taking a protective stance. Glide landed on David's shelter, wings spread in threat display. The inspectors looked between David and the 3 apex predators, their translators struggling to articulate their shock. The human has domesticated native fauna, one inspector finally managed. Not domesticated, David corrected. Befriended, there's a difference. The inspection was tense. The representatives examined David's camp with scientific instruments while giving the animals wide berth. They documented his food stores, water filtration system, tool workshop, and garden. Every measurement exceeded requirements. This is unprecedented, the lead inspector said. Your resource consumption is minimal. Your infrastructure is extensive. And you have formed symbiotic relationships with 3 separate species. 4, David said. There's also a family of those rabbit-like things that visits for scraps. The inspector's translator made sounds David interpreted as confusion. This test measures survival capability. You appear to be thriving. Survival and thriving aren't that different, David replied. Both require the same basics. Food, water, shelter, and safety. I've got all 4. The inspectors took samples, recorded videos, and asked dozens of questions. They wanted to know how David had tamed the creatures. He kept explaining he hadn't tamed anything. I just treated them with respect, David said. Fed them when they were hungry. Helped when they were hurt. Gave them space when they needed it. Same way you'd treat anyone. But these are not people, an inspector pointed out. They are animals. Predators. Dangerous. David looked at Crest, who was watching the inspectors with suspicious eyes. So are humans, according to your classification system. We're from a Class 12 Deathworld. Does that make us unworthy of respect? The inspector had no response to that. Before leaving, the lead inspector pulled David aside. The council is divided on your assessment. Some believe you have exceeded all expectations. Others worry that your methods are unpredictable and dangerous. We will extend the observation period. How long? David asked. Until we understand what we are witnessing. The shuttle departed. David returned to his daily routine. Crest settled beside him while he worked on new fish traps. Glide preened its healing wing. Boulder appeared at the forest edge, staying close like a living mountain. That evening, David cooked fish over his fire and divided it into portions. One for him, one for Crest. Small pieces for Glide. Boulder got a collection of vegetables from the garden. They ate together in comfortable silence. Above them, in observation, stations spanning multiple worlds, beings argued about protocols and precedents. They debated the nature of intelligence, cooperation, and survival. David didn't hear any of it. He was too busy splitting his last protein bar 4 ways, sharing it with his friends. Because that was what you did. You shared with those who stayed. The sky turned the wrong color on day 23. David had learned to read this planet's weather patterns, but he had never seen clouds like these. They rolled across the horizon like a bruise spreading, purple and black and angry green. His scanner confirmed what his instincts already knew. Storm coming? Not just any storm, the kind that killed everything caught outside. David had maybe 6 hours before it hit. He worked fast, securing everything that could blow away. The pottery bowls went into the main shelter. Tools got buried in sealed containers he had made from hollowed logs. The garden plants were beyond saving, but David harvested what he could. Crest sensed the danger too. The big predator paced the camp perimeter, agitated. Glide flew in nervous circles. Wing finally healed enough for sustained flight. Boulder stood at the forest edge, making low rumbling sounds that vibrated through David's chest. "We need better shelter," David said aloud. His structures would not survive what was coming. He had built them for normal weather, not this. David checked his scanner, looking for caves. There were several within walking distance. He had avoided them before, but now they were the only option. One cave system showed deep enough to provide real protection. Large enough for all of them. "Come on," David called to his companions. "We're moving." Getting everyone to follow took time. Crest came easily, trusting David completely now. Glide flew overhead, understanding the urgency. Boulder moved slowly, each step deliberate. David kept checking the sky. Those clouds were moving faster than predicted. The cave entrance sat in a cliff face hidden behind fallen rocks. David had marked it on his scanner weeks ago, but never explored it. Now he climbed inside, testing the air. Dry, no recent animal scent. Good. "Inside, all of you," David said, gesturing. Crest entered first, sniffing everything. Glide flew in and perched on a rock formation. Boulder had the hardest time. The entrance was barely large enough. The Titan had to lower its head and squeeze through, scraping hide against stone. David ventured deeper into the cave system with a torch made from tree sap and cloth. The caves branched multiple times, but one main chamber opened large enough for Boulder to turn around. Perfect. He ran back to camp twice, carrying supplies. Food stores, water containers, his remaining tools. Everything essential. The wind was picking up now, making the trees bend. David's third trip was a race against the storm's arrival. Back in the cave, David arranged their space. Food in one corner, water in another. His pack with medical supplies and the emergency beacon nearby. The animals watched him work, understanding on some level that this was important. The storm hit while David was building a fire near the cave entrance. Not inside where smoke would be a problem, but close enough for warmth and light. The wind arrived first, howling like something alive and furious. Then came the rain. Water fell in sheets so thick David couldn't see the forest anymore. Thunder cracked, shaking the cave walls. Lightning turned the world white for frozen moments. David moved deeper into the cave, leaving the entrance open. They would need air circulation. The animals clustered together, unusual prey and predator species seeking comfort in proximity. "It's okay," David said, though his voice barely carried over the storm's rage. "We're safe here." The first night was the worst. Water flooded the valley, turning the river into something wild. David's camp disappeared under the surge. Everything he couldn't carry was gone. His shelters, his garden, his workshop, all washed away. David rationed food carefully, dividing it into portions that would last. He had maybe 10 days of supplies if they were careful. The storm couldn't last longer than that, could it? On the second day, the water started seeping into the lower caves. David moved everything to higher chambers, making multiple trips. Boulder's strength proved invaluable, the Titan carrying heavy items David couldn't manage alone. Crest and Glide took turns scouting the cave system, finding alternate routes and exit points. They worked together now without David's mediation, communication passing between them in ways he didn't fully understand. On the third day, they had visitors. David heard them before he saw them. Scratching sounds from the deeper tunnels. Multiple sources. Something had been driven from its normal territory by flooding and found the caves. Crest's spines went up immediately. Glide's wings spread in threat display. Boulder positioned itself between the sounds and David. They all knew what was coming. The creatures emerged from the darkness. 6 of them. Low-slung bodies covered in chitinous plating. Each had multiple legs ending in barbed points. Their mouths were vertical slits filled with curved teeth. Cave predators. Ambush hunters that normally attacked alone. But the storm had forced them to move in a group, and now they had encountered something they considered prey. The lead predator hissed, a sound that echoed through the caves. Its companions spread out trying to flank. David's knife was in his hand, but against 6 of these things. He needed more. He grabbed a burning branch from his fire. "Back," he shouted, waving the flames. "Get back." Fire created flickering shadows that confused the predators. They hesitated, unsure of this new element. David used that moment to position himself in the narrow passage leading to their main chamber. They would have to come through single file. Better odds the lead predator attacked. It was fast, skittering across the cave floor. David swung the burning branch, connecting with its face. The creature recoiled, screeching. Crest lunged forward, catching the second predator with those massive jaws. The armor plate cracked under the pressure. Crest shook its head, and the predator flew against the cave wall. Glide attacked from above, diving with talons extended. The flying predator had learned to hunt in confined spaces during its recovery. It struck a third cave predator, driving it backward. Boulder couldn't fit through the narrow passage, but the Titan's presence blocked any attempt to flank around. That massive body was an immovable wall. The battle lasted minutes, but felt like hours. David's arms burned from swinging the torch. His knife found target twice when predators got too close. Crest took hits from barbed legs but kept fighting. Glide's wing was bleeding again. Finally, the cave predators retreated. 3 were dead or dying. The others fled back into the deeper tunnels, deciding this prey was too dangerous. David collapsed against the cave wall, breathing hard. His hands were shaking. Blood dripped from a cut on his arm where one predator had gotten through his defense. Crest limped over, making worried sounds. David checked the big predator's injuries. Puncture wounds, but nothing deep. "You're okay." "We're all okay." He treated everyone's wounds by torchlight. His medical supplies were nearly gone now. Just bandages and water to clean injuries. But they had survived. Together. The storm continued for 2 more days. David told stories to pass the time, talking about Earth and his grandfather. He didn't know if his companions understood the words, but they listened. Listening was its own form of communication. When the storm finally broke, David emerged from the cave to find a transformed landscape. The valley was a lake. Trees were down everywhere. His camp's location was underwater. "Well," David said to the others, "guess we're starting over." Boulder made a rumbling sound that David interpreted as agreement. Crest pressed against his side, offering support. Glide flew overhead, scouting for new shelter locations. They would rebuild. David knew how. He had done it before in other places, other times. The difference was now he wasn't doing it alone. Above the planet, in the observation stations, the council representatives were arguing again. David's biosigns showed he had survived impossible conditions. But more than that, he had kept 3 separate predator species alive through the same storm. Some council members wanted to end the test immediately. Others wanted to study this longer. A few were already drafting reports about human capabilities that would change how Earth was viewed across the galaxy. David didn't know about any of that. He was too busy building a new fire in a new location, surrounded by friends who had become family. The test had started as survival. Somewhere along the way it had become something else, something the council had no words for yet. Home. That was what it had become. David had built a home. The new camp sat on higher ground away from the flood zones. David had learned from the storm. His second round of construction was faster, more efficient. Experience was a hard teacher, but the lesson stuck. He rebuilt everything in 3 days. Shelter, food cache, workshop. This time he added drainage systems and reinforced walls. Boulder helped drag materials, making the work go faster. Crest and Glide hunted together, bringing back food that let David focus on building. On day 28, a council shuttle arrived. Not for inspection this time. The official message said evaluation. David knew what that meant. They were deciding if he had passed or failed. 5 council members emerged. David recognized the lead inspector from before. The others were new, wearing robes that suggested higher authority. David Reed, the lead inspector, said, "The council has reviewed your assessment data extensively. We must speak with you." "All right," David said. He gestured to the camp. "Want to sit? I've got fish cooking." The council members looked at each other. One, a being with crystalline features, spoke. "You understand this is a formal evaluation?" "I understand you're here to judge whether I lived or died for 30 days. I lived. We can do that standing or sitting. Sitting's more comfortable." They sat. David served cooked fish on the pottery plates he had remade. The council members didn't eat, but they watched while David did. Crest lounged nearby. Glide perched on the shelter. Boulder stood at the forest edge like a mountain given patience. "Your survival metrics exceed all established benchmarks," the crystalline being said. "Food stores sufficient for 60 days. Water purification system beyond requirements. Shelter and infrastructure are advanced. You have thrived, not merely survived." "That was the goal," David said between bites. "However," another council member added, this one resembling an upright insect, "your methods are unprecedented. You have formed cooperative relationships with multiple predator species. This creates complications." David set down his fish. "What kind of complications?" "The test measures individual survival capability," the lead inspector explained. "You appear to have recruited assistants. Some council members argue this violates the spirit of the assessment." David laughed. Not mocking, just genuinely amused. "You think I cheated by making friends?" "We think you demonstrated behavior our protocols did not anticipate," the crystalline being said carefully. "Let me ask you something," David said. "When your species developed civilization, did you do it alone? Individual by individual? Or did you work together?" "Together, naturally," the insect-like member replied. "But we are speaking of the same species cooperating. You have created bonds across species barriers, so?" David looked at Crest, who was watching the council members with suspicious eyes. "Humans have been doing this for thousands of years. We domesticated wolves into dogs. We partnered with horses for transportation. We worked with cats to control pests. We even convinced bees to let us take their honey." "This is different," the lead inspector insisted. "Those are domestic species. These are wild predators." "All domestic species started as wild predators," David pointed out. "Every single one. You think dogs were always friendly? They were wolves. They hunted humans. Until one human, probably on a day like this, decided to share food instead of fight." The council members conferred in languages David's translator couldn't follow. He finished his fish while they debated. Finally, the crystalline being turned back to him. "Explain your process. How did you create these bonds?" David thought about it. "I treated them like they mattered. Fed them when they were hungry. Helped when they were hurt. Gave them space when they needed it. Respected their boundaries. Same way you'd treat anyone you wanted to trust you." "But they are animals," the insect member said. "So am I," David replied. "So are you, technically. We're all just animals trying to survive. Some of us develop technology and language, but underneath, we're still driven by the same needs. Food, safety, companionship. Crest needed food and healing. I provided both. Glide needed safety and shelter. Boulder needed medical treatment. I gave what I could. They gave back by protecting me. That's not exploitation. That's cooperation." "And you believe any species could replicate this?" the crystalline being asked. "Any species willing to try," David said. "Patience helps. So does empathy. You have to understand what the other being needs and wants. Then you have to care enough to provide it. That's universal, I think, more conferring." David waited. Crest made a low sound, and David reached over to scratch behind the big predator's ridge spines. The gesture was automatic now, comfortable. "The council has reached a preliminary decision," the lead inspector finally announced. "Your assessment metrics are exceptional. You pass with the highest honors ever recorded. However, we must discuss larger implications." "What implications?" David asked. The crystalline being stood, its form refracting light. "Earth seeks full council membership and trade privileges. Your species is rated as Class 12 Deathworld inhabitants. Many council members feared humans would be too aggressive, too violent. You have demonstrated something else entirely." "What's that?" "That humans possess capabilities for interspecies cooperation, far exceeding current council members. You have bridged communication gaps we thought impossible. You have created alliances where we saw only predator-prey dynamics. This changes how we must view Earth's application. David blinked. You're saying I change politics by making friends with animals? Essentially, yes, the insect member said. Your actions here will be studied for decades, possibly centuries. You have shown that Deathworld inhabitants need not be feared. They can be valued for unique perspectives and abilities. The council members spent the next hour documenting everything. They recorded David's explanations, his methods, his observations about animal behavior. They took genetic samples from all three creatures with David's permission and the animal's tolerance. We would like to offer you a position, the crystalline being said before departing, teaching survival techniques to council species. Sharing your methods of cross-species cooperation, the compensation would be substantial. David considered it. I'd have to leave them, wouldn't I? Crest, Glide, and Boulder. They can't come with me? Correct. They are native to this planet and must remain here for ecological balance. Then no, David said simply. I'm not abandoning them. If I leave, who takes care of them? Who makes sure they stay safe? The council members looked at each other. The test period ends in 2 days. You must return to Earth then. Council regulations are clear. David felt something twist in his chest. He had known this was coming, but knowing didn't make it easier. He looked at Crest, who had saved his life. At Glide, who trusted him completely. At Boulder, who stayed close like a guardian. Can I have those 2 days? David asked quietly. Of course, the lead inspector said. We will return then for extraction. The shuttle departed. David sat by his fire while the sun set, his companions gathering close. He tried to figure out how to explain this to them. They wouldn't understand human words about duty and regulations. They would only understand that he was leaving. David spent the next 2 days preparing. He created multiple food caches in different locations, elevated and protected. He built additional shelters that the animals could use. He reinforced the camp structures to last without maintenance. He taught them everything he could, showed Crest which plants had medicine, demonstrated to Glide how to spot safe hunting grounds from above, guided Boulder to areas with good vegetation and clean water. The animals sensed something was wrong. Crest followed closer than usual. Glide rarely left David's shoulder. Boulder stayed at the camp constantly, watchful. On the final evening, David cooked one last meal for all of them. He divided the food carefully, making sure everyone got their favorite parts. They ate together as the sun colored the sky orange and red. I have to go, David said aloud. His voice cracked slightly. I don't want to, but I have to. You three are going to be fine. You take care of each other now. Stay together, that's the secret. Together you're strong. Crest pressed against his side, making sad sounds. Glide tucked its head under David's chin. Boulder rumbled, the vibration traveling through the ground. The next morning, the council shuttle arrived. David packed his few possessions. His knife, his scanner, his emergency beacon that he had never needed to use. Everything else stayed for the animals. He walked to each one, saying goodbye. He scratched Crest's favorite spot behind the spines. He preened Glide's wing feathers the way the flying predator liked. He pressed his hand against Boulder's massive side, feeling the warmth there. Thank you, David said to all of them, for everything, for trusting me, for protecting me, for being my family. The council members waited politely. David walked to the shuttle, forcing himself not to look back. Looking back would make this harder, but at the shuttle entrance he turned. Crest, Glide, and Boulder watched him from the camp. David raised his hand in farewell. Then he went inside. The shuttle lifted off. Through the window, David watched his camp shrink into the distance. 3 figures remained visible for a long time, standing together where he had left them. Back on Earth, David was treated like a hero. News organizations wanted interviews. Scientists wanted to study his methods. The council officially granted Earth full membership and trade privileges, citing David's assessment as pivotal evidence. David did the interviews, shared his methods, explained his approach, but part of him stayed on testing ground 7. With 3 friends he had been forced to leave behind. Months later, David received a message from the Council's Ecology Monitoring Division. Attached were surveillance images from the planet. The images showed Crest, Glide, and Boulder still living together near the rebuilt camp. They hunted cooperatively. They shared food. They defended the territory as a team. But more than that, The images showed other animals approaching the camp. Different species, drawn by the cooperation they witnessed. The camp had become a safe zone, where predator and prey coexisted under a truce. David's impact had spread beyond 3 animals. He had changed the ecology of an entire region, creating a new kind of community based on cooperation rather than competition. The council ecologists called it unprecedented. David called it something else, hope. That was what it was. Hope that different species, different individuals, different worlds could find ways to work together, not because they had to, but because they chose to. David framed the images and hung them in his home. Some nights he looked at them and smiled. Other nights he looked at them and felt the ache of distance. But always he was grateful. For 30 days on an alien world, for 3 friends who taught him that family wasn't about species or origin, it was about who stayed, who protected, who cared, and that was universal after all.